So, they say begin as you want to go on. And I guess for us, 2024 will just be spending all of the day consuming Taylor Swift content, because that's what Patrick and I did for all of New Year's Day. We watched Miss Americana. We took a break. We read some articles about Taylor Swift. I introduced Patrick to Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, mental age gap discourse. Then we watched Eras. And by the end of the day, I said to Patrick, and I think this gets to something that we're going to talk about today, but we've been talking about whenever we've gotten into like a cultural or literary text on the podcast, which is the question that Patrick always likes to ask, which is like, who are you being asked to identify with? And I said to him, it was strange to me when I got up and looked in the mirror to not actually be Taylor Swift. And I was like, did you have that feeling that like when you looked in the mirror, you might be Taylor Swift? And he looked at me like I was an absolute alien and was like, no. And I was like, do you ever have that feeling like when you've been like watching a lot of television that like you might actually just be this, like your own face feels strange to you? And I guess that didn't resonate with you. But that's, to me, that there was something important there. As somebody who doesn't even particularly identify with Taylor Swift, that nonetheless, like being immersed in this in some sort of way, that was where I was like somehow I expected to see her face in the mirror.
I think the closest proxy I have to that is watching Lars von Trier's Melancholia, and then after the credits rolled, stepping outside and kind of being shocked that the world was still there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's very similar, but I guess I'm talking about like the very specific feeling of just like
being Taylor Swift.
No, I mean, you're looking at someone's face in this way. And I think this happens with long form television also. And somehow you expect to have grown to be somewhat like that.
I don't know. I guess maybe I had a different response to it because I don't think I'm the target demographic for Taylor Swift. And when I'm watching it, all the like notes of identification pleas that she's ringing don't really ring for me.
Right.
I would probably feel more like the artist if I was watching somebody, I don't know, that's like a dude and angry.
Yeah.
Right.
Then I would vibe out.
I think there's something, I think that gets at the
core. And that's important.
Yeah. A core of this. And it's gendered. It raises some questions about gendering. And I think two ways.
Yeah.
Like one, we're going to talk about this. Like, I don't think Taylor Swift and the Eras Tour is like for me and you, Dan.
No.
Which is part of the reason I think why a lot of men hate her. But I liked it. I mean, I'll get that out in front. I was expecting not to like it, and I wound up actually being rather moved and kind of impressed and fascinated.
It's magical. Yeah.
And I was ready to go really negative. Like I had all these Lenny Riefenstahl jokes lined up about like I wanted to be like I want if we could, I wanted to be like, I was hoping we just have what's your favorite scene, and I'm like, oh yeah, that the scene where there's the plane and the clouds, but you just see the shadow of the plane, and then only light breaks out over Nuremberg and the plane slowly land. I was going to do that, but no, actually, I thought it was something much more actually meaningful and again touching. But
you were moved.
I was moved, yeah, and I want to talk about why. I think we can explore that together. I think it goes to the core of the phenomena. But I do also think, though, that part of the way that like I encounter myself in the mirror and like look at my face, right? I don't even have the thing of like I watch all three Taken movies back to back. I don't like see Liam Neeson in there, right? Like I don't. I mean, sometimes generally my experience of like looking in the mirror is, oh my God, I look fucking exhausted, right? And I like think of like the kid from the cover of Come and See or like I don't know, like Liam Neeson at the end of The Gray or something like. But it's not that it's not chart. I'm just like I look like shit. I'm worried about letting other people see me. But the other thing is that I don't spend the amount of time. I mean, I working with my face by applying makeup and looking at myself from different angles, etc. And I think that type of engagement, I shave and do what I can, and I try to have a skincare routine to the extent that matters. But like,
you moisturize.
I moisturize, yeah.
It shows.
Why? Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm the driest person in this room. Sorry, please continue.
But there is this thing where it's like I have to imagine that. And I don't mean to speak for your experience or to reduce this to just women as such, right? Heterosexual women. But I think that there are gendered positions where you are encouraged or condemned or some combination thereof to spend a lot of time interacting with your face and getting like putting on that kind of armor or attempting to like look at yourself from different angles to see yourself through the gaze of the other.
Yeah.
And I think that whether it's just that amount of interacting with your own face, that then when you stare at someone else's face, you kind of expect it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's that or it's because so much of Taylor Swift's own presentation and the music videos thematizes like her getting made up, right? Or like a lot of her gestures, even like it's all about tracking her facial reactions, or like she's looking at herself.
Yeah.
Or even like I got the sense from watching her dance, and I don't think she seems to be a particularly good dancer, but she seems to dance the way
like no one's watching.
Yeah, she seems to dance like
it's on purpose,
like you're a bunch of kids or like you're a bunch of girls at like a sleepover, and you're all dancing together, or you're dancing in front of a mirror on your own.
Mm-hmm.
But in any event, your relationship to yourself, yes, there is the mirror there, but also it's a sort of playful relationship to your own body, mediated through the mirror, but also directly through your own sort of pleasure in it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think she stands in for that.
Yes, absolutely.
And if anything, she does something that makes that other experience of like girding your face with various sorts of things or trying to like look presentable or like all that extra work that women have to do when they can't deduct on their taxes just to like show up for places, that is something about that latter thing redeems the former thing or makes the former thing bearable.
It sets it into question in some sort of way. Yeah. I think that's a really important thing. And we can talk about this more, but two things before we like actually like really get into it. Right. One, I feel like we need to say even more than when we started doing mailbags, when we were like, by the way, we're not clinicians. Like, we're not clinicians. We can't diagnose you. Nobody here is a Swiftie.
Yeah.
I feel extremely pleased for the first time to be the one who is like more online in this regard. This has been like super illuminating. Like Patrick, to discover that Patrick, who is terminally online, did not know who Travis Kelce was. I was like, what? Like, that's how we started doing. Patrick had COVID, and I asked him why I was so upset about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, even though I do not give a shit about celebrity relationships. And he was like, I don't know, honey, like, who's Travis Kelce? And I was like, what? Like, what's going on here? And also he had COVID and had a fever, and under those possibly coerced conditions agreed to watch the Eras Tour film and do an episode about it. But I'm not a Swiftie, although I'm a casual fan, I would say. But also, like, with the internet that I am on as a woman in my early 40s is so dominated by Taylor Swift that I've picked up by osmosis so many of these things that, like, I almost felt like talking to you both about this, that it was like, oh, this is fun because you're just like two aliens dropped into like planet Taylor Swift, which is the planet that like many of us have been living on for, the last several years. But much as I would be like, I can't give you, I can't tell you how to do your taxes, and I can't diagnose you with something. We're not Taylor Swift experts, but we are people who are deeply interested at first, just in doing an episode on the Eras Tour as a phenomenon, but that has expanded more to what is the phenomenon of Taylor Swift in 2023, now 2024. So that's what this episode is going to be about. And before we get into it, I do want to ask, just to situate us a little bit, what is your favorite Taylor Swift song?
I'm the Problem, It's Me.
Okay, that's not even the title.
What's the title of it then?
Antihero.
Antihero.
It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me.
That's the only Taylor Swift song you knew.
No. I've heard them for a long time. And actually, I'll say, like, from my work in the bar, I was always a Taylor Swift defender. I used to hear old men grumble about Taylor Swift doesn't, like, make good music, or it's just music for tweens or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like any honest person that listens to one of her songs, one, will have to admit that it's catchy. It's got like a bop to it. And two, like, her songwriting's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah. My defense of her was always that she is a generation's Bob Dylan, and like should be taken that seriously. Mm-hmm. And I guess, like, I don't know, the performance of this tour is kind of evidence that, yeah, that's more right than I think a lot of people are willing to admit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the first one that I heard on the radio that I actually actively sought out to listen to on my own was Antihero.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
You did actually bring that up to me, and you were like, "This is a banger."
It
and I
is.
was
It's
like,
a banger.
It
It's a
is.
good song.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can relate to it too.
Because
Yeah.
you're the problem.
That's right. It's
It's
me.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Patrick?
My experience of watching Miss Americana and then the Eras tour and reading all these biographical and other profiles made me realize that I had actually heard a lot more Taylor Swift than I had realized.
Yes.
Mhm.
Same.
And yeah, I wasn't
Yeah.
trading mixtapes with my friends in junior high school. Right. So, which is another thing, I think, nostalgia. And again, when this stuff hits you,
Yeah.
in some ways, it's kind of like the nice version of like trauma, at least, right? Because it's like one thing about trauma is like you never what's the blow that falls. Like that something is traumatic for one person isn't necessarily traumatic for the other person, but sometimes it just happens, and you're like, oh shit, this is the one that hits, right?
Right.
The ones that I like now watching, I'm like, oh, this is really good. I think Love Story is wonderful. I think Vigilante shit is fun. Wildest Dreams, I actually really like.
Mhm.
I think the stuff off the most recent album I think is really good in general. I've never sat down and listened to a whole album on its own.
Mhm.
The folklore stuff I didn't clock at all. I just the cottagecore era like is out of my space. But and also a lot of the ones that you listen to are on the House Abbey. I think those are ones that have really
My
sunk
getting
in for
ready
me.
to
Yeah.
I do find Taylor Swift very helpful for putting on makeup. It's really good putting on makeup music. I know your favorite Taylor Swift song. It's Style.
Style's great.
That's always been your favorite
Style's
Taylor
great.
Swift song.
We never go out of style. We never go out of style. You
So what are your favorite songs?
Yeah.
For me, can I pick like an early and a late
Sure.
Yeah.
one? I loved You Belong With Me. That's when Taylor Swift like came onto my radar. So like
Yeah.
late 2000s.
belong with me. You belong with me.
I was like still in my like music snob era, like, college radio kind of like, I did have a college radio show, like, and literally I only listened to that because Pitchfork was like, this is one of the best songs of the year. And I was like, oh, this is actually a really incredible song.
You had permission to like it.
I know. And I, whatever. I was younger then. And I think now a lot of these are really bound up with like my like workout playlist and stuff like that. But like Delicate, I'm pretty into Delicate. That's one that I return to.
Third floor on the west side, me and you, handsome, you're a mansion with a view to
I
the
do feel, and this may also be from my mom being a spin instructor, is a lot of my Taylor Swift stuff is like, are we climbing? Are we are we running? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's there's a Taylor Swift song for you for every possible thing that you would want in spin.
I think Blank Space also may be a good one. Like
Blank Space is an incredible song. Blank
Yeah.
Space is when I started to actually really be like, oh, I'm going to pay attention to this person. But I think that was also because I had left New York. I had a car, but I didn't have a car with anything other than a working radio. And so that was when 1989 had come out. And so I was listening to those songs, as were you, Patrick, in that same car, because that's when Style came out. And it was on over and over and over.
'Cause you know I love the players and you love the game. 'Cause we only
one thing that really bowled me over with our deep dive into Taylor Swift was just how ubiquitous she actually has been, right? There's something about an uncanny feeling. I'm like, oh, wow, all these songs, this has been the soundtrack for untold hours of my life in public space, right?
Yep.
And then realize that's also been the soundtrack to, well, like millions, tens of millions of people in their private lives for
Yeah.
many years. And then
Mhm.
there also there's this whole, not even a subculture, it's a monoculture. Like it's
The last monoculture.
it's the last monoculture,
right?
arguably, yeah. That they gather in public space and make meaning and have these experiences around it. So it was like this experience of like discovering that there still is a monoculture or there's a new kind of monoculture there, and it's all through the prism of this, genre spanning millennial performer who's kind of a force of nature. And I think that was a really
And who's done like, I think, what the Barbie movie set out to do.
yes. And I think
But in an actually successful space is like create this experience of collective effervescence that is around a certain although more capacious than Barbie, like idea of femininity. And that's why it's been going on in the background of your life, but not living in your head. You're listening to Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin.
I'm Patrick Blanchfield.
I'm Danielle.
And today we are talking about Taylor Swift, the Eras Tour, the film, but also about Taylor Swift, the cultural phenomenon, and what psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic thinking, psychoanalytic resources can bring to bear on understanding this phenomenon. I can already tell you that there's two concepts that are going to be really important for us today that we're going to get into. One of them is cathexis, or investment. The other one is, and this is a Lacanian concept, is the idea of the big other. But those are both going to be really important.
Cathexis is one of my favorite psychoanalytic terms.
It is.
Yeah.
Why is that, Dan?
I don't know. It's like crunchy. It's like
You like the
eating a
word?
saltine or something. Yeah, it's nice.
Okay, so let's get real technical for a second. Cathexis is a word that James Strachey, who those of you who have been listening to the Standard Edition will know as the primary editor of the Standard Edition, along with his wife Alex and the associated editorial team. And he uses it in the Standard Edition to translate a very everyday German word, which is Besetzung, meaning investment or occupation. And really what it means is the psychic investment in an object. And if that sounds pretty vague or at least broad, it's because it is. So the cathected object could be a beloved, but the you could refer to the person you're in love with. That's certainly like a very strong cathexis, the feeling of infatuation or love. But it could also be like a physical object, something in which you have poured out some of your psychic resources, and it's that object has taken on an outsized significance. So I think one of the questions that we're trying to get at here, and this is not just specific to Taylor Swift, this is about celebrity in general, is why do we, whether as individuals or as a culture or both, why and how are there certain people whom we invest with not just a sort of outsized importance, but also they become these objects of deep and abiding, what's the word I'm looking for?
I feel like preoccupation and rumination and
attachment, but not. Yeah. I wanted to say attachment, but I don't mean it in the sense that where people might be thinking about like attachment theory necessarily. Although certainly like the mother is the first cathected object in some way. But this, Taylor Swift I will never meet Taylor Swift.
No.
All of the people screaming at the Eras Tour will never meet Taylor Swift. They will not know her. Well, they will not have access to her interiority. They don't know her as a person. Bracketing that you can never know anyone's interiority, right? Let's just stipulate that. But there's a meaning that is so profoundly outsized that when we see, like when we watched Miss Americana, you see people who actually do meet her and their feelings are so overwhelming. Like I actually want to linger with this for a second, if that's
absolutely.
If that's okay.
Please.
And I told you we would talk a little bit about Lacan because we're going to talk about like the idea of the big other, but everybody deal with my seeming tangent for a minute. I promise I'm going somewhere. For Lacan, there's this idea where for desire, like you can only desire a thing you don't have. And when you get the thing you no longer really want, you can no longer desire it. which is a little bit of a sad way to think about desire in some sorts of ways. But when these fans meet Taylor Swift, unlike the general experience that most people have of like, oh my God, you wanted this promotion and you got it and you feel nothing, or like you don't feel like your feelings don't quite line up with your wishes or your hopes or your dreams or your desires. You get the desired thing. And it's not like it's ashes in your mouth, but it's never the feeling of complete wholeness that you actually want. That is not true when these fans meet Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
They are so overwhelmed that they start crying. Their faces, their happiness is so full. And it's like, and Patrick, can I get kind of personal for a minute? Because we're behind the paywall. What I was thinking about as we were watching Miss Americana yesterday, and we were watching the section where a bunch of Japanese fans come to meet her, and they almost can't hug her because they're like, it can't be real. It's better than real. One man proposes to his soon to be then fiance in front of her, and their faces go into this sort of rictus.
Yeah.
It made me think about when we were getting married that, and I'm not a person that like deals that well with overwhelming feeling, which is kind of funny as the host of a psychoanalysis podcast. But as we were in the process of getting married, all of these geese flew overhead. Just a huge number, like it totally interrupting the ceremony of Canada geese. And I started laughing so hard that I cried. I was overwhelmed with emotion. And it was like, that was the only way that I could deal with this sort of like over fullness.
Yeah.
And I could see in that strange rictus on these fans' faces, they had gotten the thing that they wanted, and it was even better than they could possibly have imagined. And that seems important to me.
Yeah. There's interesting reports of phenomena like Taylor Swift amnesia type stuff, which is oddly like people go to
Is it like Stendhal syndrome?
So actually Stendhal syndrome is related here, right? Because it's like it's
amazing.
It's the idea. I think it's like you see a painting or something, you just start weeping, right? I don't know. I haven't had that with a painting, but like I remember there are a couple places like walking into Hagia Sophia when I did that. I actually just was literally just stupefied by it and almost a little bit teary because it was just so grand that I had read so much about it and for many years, and then I finally saw it, right? But I think the Taylor Swift amnesia thing is one thing where a lot of people report that they don't remember what happens at the concerts. They have like peak experiences, but it's just so much overwhelming stimulus that they sort of disassociate from it.
Yeah.
Suppose it was, Taylor Swift amnesia. And again, there's like a weird analogy to trauma here because it's like it's overwhelming. You can't like process it into necessary like memory or like encode it necessarily. And so you just have like this blank space, so to speak. But
I see what you did there.
Nice.
But I think like the cathexis thing is worth lingering on for a minute or two more too, because like it is a weird Greco shitty word, right? Cathexis, right? And then an object becomes cathected, right?
It's a fake word.
It sounds like a video game term.
Yeah, or like a luxury car, right? Like the Lexus cathexis or something, right? You decathect when you sell it used. But there's, sorry. The deal with this though is that like, the German is not quite the same as the English in the sense like it's an investment where it's like it could be a financial investment. Think about that. Like that's a good metaphor. Let's linger with the metaphors for a second.
It's
right?
in French. It's also investissement. Yeah, that's the translation.
So it could be like say like it's an investment of like it's like a tranche, so to speak, in your psychic portfolio, right? Like you've got money, you've got like psychic currency riding on it. It's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of thinking about it could be the Germans, another terms like occupation or preoccupation.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the thing you do or the thing that you keep returning to, right?
But like a city is occupied too.
And that's the other sense of
the military sense.
Which is also technically like a way of using the word invest, right? But like literally it takes work. You have to station troops there.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that too, and this is I think, what we could say sort of structurally here then, just to gloss the term in kind of fancy language, right? A cathexis is a distribution of psychic energy.
Yeah.
Right?
Energy is the word that I would think I was actually reaching for before.
And we can talk about what specifically the logic of psychic energies or what the energy is and can it be quantized and what are the psychic agencies that produce it. Put a pin in that. We'll talk, Freud's views change on it, but just like as a good portable term, cathexis.
Cathexis.
It's a very invested object. And it's, to use a psychological term, it becomes self-relevant.
And it doesn't have to be positive psychic energy. That's important.
And this, and I'm thinking about it of energy and thinking about investment as like a putting of investment into something is really helpful for thinking about that, like kind of, fungibility or that transferability or the way that can transform.
Yeah. Which is actually like an interesting way of thinking about how Taylor Swift herself is talking about the ways that like, women in music get a certain amount of time, and then you move on and then it's Olivia Rodrigo, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And by the same token, too, I mean, we should say there's a kind of eerie.
No disrespect to Olivia Rodrigo.
There's an eerie mirroring here between that and the football players paradox too, right? Like Travis Kelce has only so many years before his body is going to be completely fucking ruined.
Yep.
So he's got to invest a lot of effort in that, and then he's got to save, and then he can become like a car dealership owner or whatever the hell it is NFL guys do. Right.
Yep.
Later.
You
right.
can be Mr. Taylor Swift.
But
actually,
we'll get to
an
that.
option most people don't have.
You can sell cathexis.
Cathexis.
Sorry.
Cathexis.
But like, think about, run with these metaphors for a moment, right?
Not the car dealership one.
No, the ones about investment, right?
Yeah.
I just put $20,000 in Bitcoin. The Bitcoin blows up. I don't just, but like the bottom falls out of the market. Or hell, actually, FTX, the crypto exchange, was going to be a $100 million partner on the Eras tour. They went belly up. Imagine you just had...
Is that true?
Yeah. Imagine you had a whole bunch of money in crypto. You're invested in crypto. And you're also like cathected onto the idea of crypto. You're becoming a crypto person. You're telling people who now hate you about how crypto is really good, right? And then suddenly your investment is you lose, your wallet gets stolen, it craters, it turns into a fly-by-night operation.
It turned out crypto was a grift.
Yeah. You don't wake up the next day, check like your phone and like, oh, okay, my $20,000 is gone. And this whole scheme that I thought was going to save, the economy and prevent global warming and be on the blockchain and whatever the fuck. That was all bullshit. You don't just like then have your granola and move on to something else, right? You're angry about that. You've got a $20,000 hole in your wallet.
That energy's got to go somewhere.
Right. That energy's got to go somewhere. Or rather, like that energy has been put there. And what was previously the energy of hope, it had the character of hope, affection, love, enthusiasm, all these dreams riding on it, now becomes bitterness, anger, hatred, right? Another way of thinking about this, just to run with these analogies that are really helpful.
You go from being a bored ape to being an angry ape.
You regress. But another really great way of thinking about cathexis is again, psychic energy, right? Because the idea here is that psychic energy can change its form.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's fun. The money thing is really important because there's nothing else that's as fungible as psychic energy, right?
Yeah, and it's weirdly not zero sum in a way that money isn't. But this is also gets at the point, right? Imagine like you're in love with somebody, right? I mean, Freud gives the very grim example of like why is mourning so hard, right? When you lose somebody. Well, that's because they're a cathected object.
Yeah.
You've put all this love in them. You've imagined a future with them. You've imagined all the things you're going to do. And now suddenly they're dead. And there's cognitive research on this, actually, to the extent to which if we want to get neuropsych, like people who lose a loved one who they've been with for a long time apparently actually have more difficulty envisioning futures in general, right? So there's a way in which another example might be those moments when you think the person's still there, you're dreaming and your mind thinks that you're going to wake up next to them, right? That's why it's so painful. It's because you've put something in them.
Well, the withdrawal of cathexis or, decathexis, right? It's not something that just simply happens. It's not a purely cognitive or mostly cognitive operation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It involves time and it involves this kind of you return to the well, sometimes because you're getting water out of it to sustain yourself, and other times to spit in it. But either way, you're returning to it. And I think the final example, which I want to sort of like pivot to here, right, is imagine like the breakup. Okay, like you love somebody, they're your boyfriend, like they're your Jill Alwyn, right? Like this is the person who is your special partner. Right.
I don't think anybody ever cared about Joe Alwyn that much.
She cared
Taylor
about him
Swift
for like 5 or 6 years. They
they
supposedly got married.
He was a non-entity.
Well,
I'm just saying.
Well, you're right. He was uncathected by the world, but she was clearly cathected in him.
Yeah, right.
okay,
So,
that's fair.
okay.
That's fair.
You-
Okay.
It's actually revealing.
Yeah. So in this story, you
I
are
was
in
just
love with
gonna
somebody.
say like he was your Jake Gyllenhaal or something like that. Let's make it an all too well.
Well, no, I want to use an example of someone that you actually care about that isn't like a briefer fling, right? But Jake Gyllenhaal's a great example here too, right? Imagine, again, for all of us who are not Taylor Swift, you have an experience of falling in love with someone, you're in a relationship, and then let's say, and you love them, you imagine every day with them, like you trust them, you have experiences with them. Then suddenly you find out that they've been cheating on you. You now, it's not like that investment disappears. You're not like, you wake up the next day and you're like, he was a dog, a new boyfriend time, right? You can't. It's much like being like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, did your wife just die? Well, there are other ladies out there. Your kid just died. You just have another one. No, you're singularly invested in these people,
Yes.
but now they're they're not dead, they're not gone. You don't have to like reconcile that, but they're right there, and all these good feelings that you have now transform to something else. But of course, it's really messy, right? It's this psychic drama of you're like, oh, I love this person, but actually they were two-timing me the whole time. So now it's painful when I think about loving them. Or, you hear a song later that you shared with them and previously it brought you joy, but now it brings you pain. In other words, this process of investing energy means that when the object fulfills expectations or doesn't fulfill expectations or causes you pain, there's a working through or a changing of that energy and its character. It doesn't just disappear.
Yeah.
And to bring this to bear on the Taylor Swift phenomena, right? And on pop stars in general, think about like the feelings that people have towards Taylor Swift and their investments, call them parasocial or other things, but right now, just think about them as investments. Oh my God, she's dating this guy, Matt Healy. This guy who was on Come Town, this guy who did all these terrible things that we're going to cancel him for. We are so disappointed in her, right? So you can't just be like, oh, I don't like Taylor Swift anymore because she's dating somebody. It's, she's bad. She needs to shore herself of this. Or she was like, I used to love her, but then I decided she's actually an evil calculating bitch. Clearly the pathway that these sort of like expenditures of energy are taking has been carved by social logics of misogyny and all these other types of like exceptionalism. But the idea here then is that when you're attached to a public figure and they change or they seem to change or they have like different albums, right? I.e. the like, well, I really like so-and-so their early work. I was really invested in that. But then, I don't know, the more recent stuff, I took that as a personal betrayal and now I hate them, right? That affective switch, the switch, it's in the character of the energy. It's not necessarily a diminishment of the energy as such. It just takes a different form.
And this is also why the Eras tour is so brilliant because she's sort of like, love all of me.
Yeah.
You have no other choice. Right. I contain multitudes and I refuse. I'm thinking also now about the Taffy Broadus or Ackner piece that was in the New York Times a while ago, which is all about, Taylor Swift and the sort of the way that the Eras tour is all about the refusal of shame or cringe of your earlier self. And there is something where she's sort of like, I will do this thing that you want, which is the constant transformation. She says something in Miss Americana about like, I will find ways to keep being like shiny and new for you, like clearly at great personal cost. But then there's a way where she's also refusing to walk any of it back, which, and this is something that we'll get to, is why there's a whole, and we'll also get to this in particular when we talk a little bit about how she discusses her own relationship with food and eating. There is a having your cake and eating it too thing that's happening with Eras, which is, I'm 33, I'm in my Jesus year, I am a grown-up woman, I am going to be the size that I'm going to be, I'm not going to starve myself anymore, but also I am still that girl. And that is actually like a profoundly like psychoanalytic kind of affirmation in some sense of, yes, I am my earlier self and I refuse to disavow that. And I refuse to say that it's gone even. I'm going to live it out in front of you every night. And you're going to like it. And you're going to find that part of yourself there. And I'm also not doing it for you. But am I doing it for you? But I am doing it for you. But I'm not. No, I'm not doing it. I'm doing it for me. That's the public, private, the constant dance of withholding and revelation that I think keeps people coming back.
from what you were talking about with cathexis and change, and especially like I definitely had bands when I was growing up where the new stuff was not as good as the old stuff, and it kind of tarnished the entire portfolio or whatever. It seems like the genius of Taylor Swift is that, especially with the Eras tour, every time she had a moment to speak into the microphone, she talked about herself, her career, and her fans.
Yeah.
Those are the only things that she talked about on the stage, and it felt like the thing that she is so good at repackaging right now is that the thing that my audience used to identify with was some kind of aspiration, whereas now the thing that she's asking everybody to identify with is the change.
Totally.
That's the thing that she's.
I
that's the
was
carpet she's laying down.
joking to Patrick that this is the Sublation tour.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Much better put.
Thinking about stuff in terms of cathectic investment, or at least thinking about stuff in terms of like energies, is good because it allows us to think in terms of structures and also to think about, in a non-judgmental way, about how we relate to not just to Swift, but to other figures who function like Swift, but also just like how we find touchstones in the world and how that maps onto our own circumstances and development
Mhm.
and the like.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, Dan, about what you just said, the example of the like, you like one thing that a band does because it's sort of special. It's a thing you discovered or someone gave you. And then now it's much more popular and other people are bringing something else to it. And also maybe the sounds has changed a little. In any event, you're like, this is not, it meant something to me, but now it means something to the other, or it means something different to a broader set. And now I want to disidentify with it. And so
The narrative isn't my own anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This idea of like, and this is a
And disidentification is painful in the same way that cathexis is painful.
So you sneer at the people dancing at whatever, right? You're like, I'll give my example of my own, right? I remember my college girlfriend in my freshman year, turned me on to Modest Mouse, and I fucking love Modest Mouse.
It's a good band.
That's. I'm not going to make fun of Modest Mouse.
Well, what I will say,
I like Modest Mouse.
I fucking love Modest Mouse, but
I haven't thought about them in a while, but
the Good News for People Who Love Bad News album, though, right? The one with Float On, which is the one that finally like hit top 40.
Mm-hmm.
I was like really liking some of the weirder, like Birds and Worms, like This Is a Long Drive for Someone to Know with Nothing to Talk About. All that, like the weirder songs, the sadder songs, like the songs that are basically about being on psychiatric medication.
Oh.
And then there's this
very
like,
on brand,
this top 40 banger, and I remember being at a party and people were like dancing to it, and I'm like, it was like a party like it was not a how do I say this?
It wasn't cool.
It was like a finals club party. And I'm like, this is terrible. And I remember, but I've also heard, apparently people were like, actually, if you see Modest Mouse live, they're terrible. I've heard that too, like never see them live. But the point here,
never meet your idols.
Right, it's weird, right? Because I'm like, well, why do I like this particular band? Right? Like, and part of it's because, Catherine gave it to me, right?
Formative moment.
So this is actually exactly what I want us to push to, right? Which is this idea that
this is actually very emotional. It's making me think about, because I grew up in Chicago, it's making me think about like loving Wilco before they were famous.
And when it's music, it hits different to think back on.
It really does.
There's a kind of randomness, or to use a kind of, I guess, like a fancy word, like there's a contingency to it. It doesn't necessarily have to be one given thing.
Right.
By which I mean, like, think about like how many songs are out there that are about like being a lovelorn teenager or having a bad breakup or being angry, right? There's a enormous amount of cultural output that thematizes that stuff.
Sure.
But the stuff that like hits you at a certain time is a little bit random. It's a little bit contingent. It's something a friend gives you. It's something you hear on the radio when you're like 13.
What's coming out at that particular time.
Exactly.
Also, right?
Yeah. It's that specific window of like, you're no longer quite a child, but you're definitely not an adult, like puberty and thereabouts, both for social reasons and probably at some biological ones too. Like you are experiencing things for the first time. And sure, everyone else may experience love, heartbreak, frustration, whatever, depression, whatever. And people have been experiencing these things for hundreds of years or whatever, right?
Probably more than hundreds.
I mean, people have been experiencing these things for time immemorial, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for you, it's the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe you weren't listening when your dad was playing stuff on the radio and it didn't hit you, right?
Mhm.
But now you have the Walkman on your way home from school, or you have the mixtape, or you hit something on Spotify, or something comes up right when you've first fallen in love with someone or think you're falling in love with someone,
Yeah.
right? Or it's right when the first breakup happens. And then the content of the song, even the musical quality may be indifferent, but it hits that affective note and it becomes a site of cathectic investment.
This is actually not totally separate from what we were talking about in our our second episode about transference,
Yes.
right? In that like there are patterns that you repeat, but there also has to be something about the person there. Do you know what I mean? That there are some, like we're all dating ourselves with our music choices here, but what like it's bringing up all of these sorts of things where I'm just like, okay, if you played me in the airplane over the sea, I'm going to burst into tears, right? And it is some quality of like the time that I listened to that album and the circumstances, but it's also some quality of the album itself. And I think that that's part and of Jeff Mangum's voice. There is a there that is not all about you. And I think in some ways that's what we're circling around when we're getting to Taylor Swift, because it's not just she's like the universal donor and she's talking about universal themes. Because as you're saying, like that's what all pop music does, right? She didn't invent heteronormative love stories, so some of what we're getting at is like, what is the there that has made her so sticky?
Yeah.
For so many people.
We're going to talk about why Taylor Swift specifically has this remarkable staying power in a way a lot of other things don't. Like, if the song that you heard at the dance where you got your first kiss was by a one-hit wonder, well, I mean, maybe that makes you feel something when you occasionally hear it. And maybe you're going to like retire and go on a cruise with, I don't know, Eagle Eye Cherry or something when you're 70 or 80.
Butterfly.
I was totally thinking Butterfly.
Oh my God. I'll upfront say something about Taylor that I think is other people have said, but I think what she does in a way that is very brilliant, right, is I think she's acutely aware of contingency in terms of her own career, in terms of what hits, what doesn't, what's trendy, what isn't, the way in which the cathexis of the public can turn on a dime.
Shift,
Yeah. She's very much aware of that. But what I think she does is in all her different eras, she not only performs different types of selfhood and different characters, but she also thematizes and basically says it's okay to be different types of people, and over and against like either being a one-hit wonder or being like a postmodern fragmented self where you're always unstable.
Like a Lady Gaga figure.
Yeah, like where it's pastiche. She both has this kind of, well, yes, there's pastiche. Yes, there is fragmentation. Yes, there is this sort of like postmodern kind of, by which I mean like these narratives fracture, time temporality is very unclear. There's a little bit of the 1950s, and then we're in like a Victorian cottage, and now we're in space or whatever. Like it is that, but it also is all pulled together by this broader emphasis on like where you are right now is the sum of these previous selves. You contain these selves, and that's okay, right? So she thematizes this idea of allowing you to connect with her in different ways and allowing you to connect with yourself in different ways over time.
Yeah. I mean, this is also, I mean, and if you want to read it in that way, I said it was the Sublation tour. And now actually she's moved into her good enough mother phase.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you can Taylor will give you permission to be exactly who you are at the moment that you are without regret, without cringe.
And so with that spirit in mind, and since we're not Swifties, I kind of wanted to ask us about our own experiences. And I'm doing this because I really want to be clear here. Like, I don't want to disrespect the Swifties in the audience, but also I want to speak to people who have no interest in Swift, but also maybe also give people who are interested in Swift something that they can use to think about their own relation to it, in a way that would be useful. I'm trying to think about, I wanted to ask us, like, what was the stuff that hit us or that made us in that, like, crucial moment where we were starting to feel our own feelings or imagine that we could be different people, right? And if anything, hell, like I think puberty is a really key moment in this, because suddenly, like, literally, you're not the same fucking person. Your body is doing weird stuff that you may not understand, right? Or like you're imagining, like, ooh, this is the person I'm going to like get married with, or like I'm going to be in this career or whatever, right? And we'll talk about her own narrative and her biography in a minute, but just to, I think, in the spirit of being like, let's own the cringe and kind of celebrate it lovingly or with a type of compassion, I kind of wanted to ask, like, what were the touchstones for you that came along and that gave you that like licensed you to be a person, or licensed you to experiment with being different types of people, or like that gave you some affects, or allowed you to name an affect that you were feeling for the first time and relate it to other people? Could I ask that? Like, what was it for you?
Man, we get vulnerable in this podcast a lot.
I know.
No, I'm not opposed to it. We were not allowed to listen to music when I was growing up. It was only hymns and classical music. But I always loved guitar and rock, even though I wasn't allowed to play it, wasn't allowed to listen to it. And I had a very good friend, Joseph Kaczynski. I can cut out his last name. Well, whatever. Yeah.
Shout out Joseph.
What's up, Joe? I had a very old friend, Joseph Kaczynski, who his parents let him do anything. So I had a CD player, and he would burn me CDs with his musical taste on pretty much on it. And that was my access to music from like the outside world. And on, I think it was the second CD he gave me, it had, the first half was like a best of hits of Linkin Park. And then the second half, I think it was right when the single with Jay-Z and Numb was on there. Along with a bunch of other, like, now in retrospect, like, I'm calling myself white trash in my musical taste when I was coming up, like totally trashy, not very good. But man, Linkin Park hit so good for me.
Yeah.
Like, it let me feel angry, and like in the text of the lyrics, it was like, fuck you, mom and dad.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, yeah. Bad music now, but whew, they hit good.
Tom
They hit good when I
Shinoda is
a
a
kid.
great producer.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Mike Shinoda. Yeah. I like Fort Minor. It's his like solo project. Yeah, it's very good.
I'm trying to answer your question in like the real spirit that is intended, which involves like a certain degree of not caring at all about the coolness
Yes.
of any of it. And I think like from pretty early on, I was kind of invested in that.
What about you?
Oh, you're asking me now. Okay.
Yeah, we know
but
college
believe
was
me.
Modest Mouse.
Yeah, I mean, I still like Modest Mouse, but I think I'm thinking about something that both of you were saying, where it's like you don't know what the lyrics are necessarily about.
Oh my God, Lisa Loeb.
I was
Sorry.
about- that was on my list,
Oh
yes.
my God,
Okay,
Lisa
yes.
Loeb. Okay, all of a sudden, but just like this is like we're actually doing this like psychic work here.
Yes.
Like I didn't prepare
Oh my
for
God.
any of this, but yeah, okay, stay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's yeah.
because this is what you're actually getting at is like not the stuff that I was like listening to and would tell other people that I was listening to. This stuff that like lived rent free in your head before we had that expression, long before we had that expression, and that like spoke to like the parts of your soul that you were ashamed of but newly feeling. Like that's what you're talking about. You're talking about puberty.
Yeah, but also too about like getting to have feelings that are your feeling and that are internal and that you can't quite put a name to, but then suddenly you have this thing in the world that both names it, but also allows you to occupy it in a very first person way that's unique to you.
Yeah.
Right?
It's therapy before therapy.
I think it's a thing that definitely operates on like that transverse axis that cuts across subjectivities. Right? And yeah, it's fine. I actually have Lisa Loeb written down here, right? The one Do You Sleep, Do You Dream Me Anymore? That song. I don't remember the title of the song. Smoked with a Ghost in the Back of Your Head. It's the one that there's that Sarah Silverman episode about how her dad comes back after being her deadbeat dad returns out of years of like not being around anywhere and just is like, I'm here. I'm going to be a father again. And then he and Sarah Silverman play that song. They go on a concert tour playing this Lisa Loeb song and everyone's always crying and then he deadbeats again. But that's neither here nor there. Like for me, like, yeah, I mean, this dates me, right? Like, but hell, I know every single word on the Jagged Little Pill album.
Do you?
Oh, fuck yes. Every single fucking word.
Sweetie.
Right? I Lisa Loeb, I love, but I also, look, I mean, we're going to lean into the cringe here. People who are like, maybe some people will turn this off because it's not enough Swift, but we're going to get there. But I think we need to, in order to do the Swift thing with respect, I think we need to bear our own stuff here too. Right? I mean, I was thinking like Annie DeFranco, Melissa Etheridge, the Indigo Girls, later Brandy Carlisle, like lots of like lesbian or lesbian adjacent stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But those were my experiences of like yearning, right? And or hell, I remember hearing
Baby
like
Patrick.
Sting's Fields of Gold, feeling that and being like, I would love to dance at that at my wedding. We didn't do that.
That would have been an entirely different woman.
No, yeah, exactly.
I would have been okay with that.
And like, look, this is different from what like my friends were like.
I'm dying that you said Sting.
I'll own it. I'll own it.
Kill the part of you that cringes.
No, like it's when Alanis Morissette for you was singing about that song, right? If you are a 13-year-old, right, you may not have had the experience of Well, of being left by someone who is now having a baby with another woman, and that seems like a lot to ask for.
Only
and to
now
live through.
realizing that's what that song was about.
Yeah. And also, you may not understand all the lyrics, right? Because literally the bit about, this woman going down on the CAD in a theater is that gets, censored out, right? They bleep it or they silent it. It's the radio edit. You may not know any of those things, but somehow you're like, he didn't call me back, or like he didn't pass me a note, or he gave me a weird look. God damn it, I am angry at him. Or to give the example, I'm thinking, Dan, like all like the new metal, right? Like I don't know the experience of like being when I'm 14, like I don't know what it's like to be like to have my like sick riffs stolen by some other band, or to have to deal with like producers who are telling me I have to be less cool, right? I don't have these experiences. I certainly don't have the experiences of being angry at all these groupies who just want me for my body and the car, but never stick around, right?
Yeah.
I don't.
I'd like to point out that your producer did today tell you to be less cool.
Wait, did I?
Yeah, with the like, we have to lean in and be really vulnerable on this segment.
Well, when I was 14, I couldn't even imagine that, right? But somehow you're like, I do have to do homework, right? Right. My bro, like, totally did not give me back the magic cards I lent him. That's exactly like as if he stole all my lyrics, right?
100%.
Yeah. Or like, yeah, I'm not like getting laid rock star style, but like I feel really awkward around these girls, so I must hate them too, right? And you hear this song and that voices it. I'm not necessarily claiming these as first-person experiences,
no,
right?
I know.
But like,
I'm just
you're totally right.
You're totally on. I'm just thinking of the way that like now there's Andrew Tate for that.
Yeah, so like I guess what I'm saying here is like for me, yeah, it was a lot of like adult contemporary and like indie lesbian folk. And
I love that for you.
Thank you. The thing that made it different, of course, right, is that then when you have friends who you can't pretend to like certain things, you have to pretend to like other things, and like all my friends pretended to like classic rock, but not like particularly good classic rock.
Everybody went through that like AC/DC phase when I was growing up, but nobody really liked it.
Like listen to these Clapton rips, and I'm like, okay, yeah, he's a very good guitarist.
Ironically, all I did listen to at that time of my life was Pink Floyd. I have every lyric to every Pink Floyd song memorized. That was my Roman Empire.
The other thing I wanted to put on the table here too is imagine like conversations you might have as a friend, or like when you were recommending or you encounter a song and you'd be like, this song is about me. And you wouldn't necessarily literally like take it as like, I don't know, you don't like go out to shoot Ronald Reagan because you think you're going to impress like the lyricist behind the song. Like
it's not the literal content.
It's not coded messages, but it verges. You write yourself into the song.
Sure.
Right. You're like, this is exactly what my friends are like. And that challenge we went through, that's exactly like what we did at the track meet, or right. Or like this betrayal is exactly what happened to so-and-so. Right. It seems self-relevant in a way that's really overcoded.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's about, so the story of the song diegetically, which is also a function of oftentimes the stories that performers are narrating about their performing or their careers. There's like an interesting, what you could call like transferential constellation happening here, I guess, or like a set of contingencies where like you have a songwriter who writes a song, and maybe it's about a bunch of people they made up. Maybe it's about their own experiences, whatever. You now are having experiences, and you take it as like it becomes like your soundtrack, or it's about you in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this resonance where you're like, this person understands me, when really it's more that you understand yourself through this person.
There's a kind of history of technology angle of this also that's relevant, is like, it's not that long ago in real terms that people started with like the invention of the Walkman originally the invention of the Walkman. And, for us, like the Discman and then the MP3 player before the smartphone, that you were able to have these self-assigned delete, that's not a word, but we're going to go with it, self-relevant things accompanying you.
Yeah.
As you move through the world.
There's data that shows that the concept of a teenager that we have today wasn't a thing until the record player was invented.
Yeah, I buy that.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine though, like some kid that some emo kid in like the 1910s being like, have you ever heard Camptown Races? That song is me,
That song
man.
slaps.
That song is fucking a banger. It's about us, dude. We're gonna we're gonna tear up the town. Like,
Doodah.
but like, there's a confluence of contingencies here, right? I don't think a lot of other artists, though, thematize or offer as open a framework in terms of their text as does she.
Yeah.
So it's like,
or as systematic and complete.
and it's simultaneously narratives that are about her, but that can be are just universal or quasi-universal enough in their feelings or the stories that they relate that they can also be about you. And it produces this kind of feedback loop where it's like you listen to this song about her being betrayed when you've been betrayed, and then you learn more about her other experiences, and then later you will watch her perform the song triumphantly, and you'll reflect on your triumph for your previous like heartbreaks. It's like it's this odd.
It's open enough. The focal point is Taylor, but the focal point is not Taylor. The focal point is, and it's like she's managed to thread that needle over and over and over and over again by creating this body of work, and also like filling it with Easter eggs for dedicated fans, which is not us. Like we don't know that much about like the Taylor Swift Easter eggs other than like the number 13 and stuff like that. If exegesis hadn't begun with the study of the Bible, right, or like hermeneutics, it like we could live in a world where it just like began with like for many people, like close reading comes from like learning to study the Taylor Swift oeuvre. But there is this way in which like it's about her, but it's never just about her. And I think that might give us a nice segue to actually, for those of you who are Swifties, you can probably like skip the next little bit because we just want to say like a little bit about like who Taylor Swift is, and also a couple, and a lot of this is gleaned from the documentary from a few years ago, Miss Americana, which is. I mean, I feel like we're in this sort of nested series of stories here over and over again, because, like Taylor Swift will tell you herself that every artist needs to have a hook and that hers is the way that she's a storyteller. I mean, you could also actually say a lot of that about like country music in general. I don't think it's necessarily true. But like if you read, like Taylor Swift was the 2023 Time Person of the Year, and if you go and read that article, it is all about how Taylor Swift has come to tell a story, and the author is reflecting on the way that the story that Taylor Swift has told her is always a little bit further ahead of the story that she is going to be writing. So even in Miss Americana, which, some people have said is like actually remarkably like unforthcoming, like you can see very much she is telling this story, but I think it will be helpful for us to, regardless of how much actual biography we're going into, to be like, here is sort of the plain text. I'm thinking now about like Jewish exegetical categories. Like, what's the pshat here? Like, what's the plain story like of. Like before we get into esotericism, right? What is the plain meaning of the story of Taylor Swift according to Taylor Swift as the subject of a documentary about Taylor Swift, which by virtue of being a documentary is supposedly not directed by subject of the documentary Taylor Swift.
But boy, it feels like it though.
But it sure feels like it. In particular, I want us to look at two of the things that she clearly gives as her framing devices for how you should understand her, which is in her relationship to praise and adulation, what we might and will in a few minutes talk about as her relationship to the big other. And second, in terms of her relationship to food and eating and to the image of herself, which is always going to be in relation to how she sees herself as the other is seeing her, which is always in relation to her size.
Just gonna go have fun. No one out there that I know of in the audience actively hates me. Not get dead face. Ready to do this? Ready. Totally ready. Throughout my whole career, label executives would just say, a nice girl doesn't force their opinions on people. A nice girl smiles and waves and says thank you. I became the person everyone wanted me to be.
I think that Taylor Swift, she is annoying.
All of her model friends. Too good. Going through guys like a train. She's too skinny.
At the very beginning of this story that she frames for us in Miss Americana, it is about being deeply other-oriented. And I think that's like a kind of polite way to say it in some way, because it's more like I needed to be thought of as good. I needed to be the good girl. But it's about praise. It's about approval. It's about approbation. And the sense is like myself is formed only in relation to the approval of others. And in this case, we're not talking about the like kid who falls apart when she gets a bad grade because her parents want her to get all A's. We're talking about somebody who is standing on a stage in front of thousands and thousands of people, and then eventually, more than hundreds of thousands of people. But at this point, and it's the idea is sort of like, without that, I do not know who I am. And what you get here is also a sense of like, and she's giving you this again. This is Taylor driving this narrative, is like the fragility of the self when you live for the approval of the other.
Almost a sense of I don't exist unless I'm being interpreted, and a realization that you can sculpt something to be interpreted. You can be intentional about it.
Yeah. I think it will be helpful here for us to sort of like unpack the other concepts alongside cathexis that Abby invoked at the beginning. It's like a psychoanalytic
you call it the big other
Yeah, the idea of like the big other, or even, and I because I don't want to get too like in the Lacanian weeds and talking about that, just the idea of otherness in general. So let's just pause for a moment and linger on this idea of what we could call like the other as an abstraction. And that's a kind of attenuated or strange abstraction, precisely because it underscores the fact that our experience of other people as we grow up is first and foremost an experience of specific others. Right? It's your mom, it's your dad, or whatever the structural caregiving units are. And a lot of the dynamics that we were talking about, like, well, as you were becoming a new type of person, right? You're deciding what's your favorite song? What do you listen to? These things that we were narrating in this like teenage moment are you're sort of developing a sense of who you are as a subject in relation to others. Right. I don't listen to what my dad listens to. I don't listen to what my kid sister listens to. I listen to my own thing. And this is a type of thing that's for people like me. Right. You enter a subculture, you have defined yourself in relation to some sort of like sound or group or aesthetic. Broadly speaking, we could, of course, say that like the idea of the other, or of there being others, and to use a fancy word, we could call it like alterity or like otherness.
Yeah, it's just the noun form of otherness.
Is a preoccupation of psychoanalysis generally, but also, specifically, but also like a lot of like 20th and 21st century philosophy in general, right? This idea like
Hegel, master slave.
Yeah.
You are formed in and through relation to the other.
Yeah. And like, and it always toggles between this question of ambiguity, right? Of like the specificity of you as a subject, or the specificity of specific others in your life, versus like the idea of unknown others, or the fact of there being many others out there, or others that are not specific. And, different thinkers will trope this in different ways. Lots of them will ask like questions like, well, it's never just an other. Is the other an enemy, or is the other your neighbor? Is there an ethical relation? Are they an animal? Are they strange? Like, could you have it like you break down like the ambiguities of what otherness is in a lot of ways. And in fact, we can call back to our interview with Jay Davis to think about this, right? The colonial other versus like the other who is, the one who goes to see the colonial other, the colonized other in a human zoo, right? All this is meant to say, though, that the way that we understand ourselves is through complicated relations, sometimes of identification, sometimes of disidentification, sometimes of mimetically doing what someone does, sometimes of like trying to provoke them or doing what they don't want, etc.
Mhm.
But that our relationships to alterity or to others is a site of, it's not just transactional in a very simple sense, but it's cathected. These are cathected relationships, right? And they're cathected with dynamics of fantasy, of paranoia, of yearning. And in that sense, there's this idea of like when you interact with others, or when you interact in this very unique way that I think social media contemporarily does, or like modern sort of like identity performances demand. And I think here it's very helpful to underscore how Taylor Swift is a digital native, right?
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
she is a millennial. That
She's 34 now. Yeah.
that your orientation to the other is never just a given, but involves some dynamics of aspiration. I want to seem like this thing. Some anxieties. Maybe I'm not seeming like this thing. What do they want from me, etc. And orientation here, it has a gendered or sexed component to it, I guess. Like there's a sexual erotic aspect to it.
Sure.
But another way of thinking about like other orientation might be like the way a sunflower turns to the sun,
Mhm.
right? Like we're always turning to the other. Or hell, I'll think one example here, right? You're listening to lots of things that are on the radio, and then your parents come in and they're like, "What is this garbage? This is terrible." And you were kind of mediocre about it, but now you're like, "That's my jam." And then you turn it up, right? And then suddenly you find yourself liking new metal, right? Or being a new metal guy, right?
And that's Dan's origin story.
Oh God,
No,
don't pin that on me. No, it's a great example. It's a great example.
Like I didn't like Power Man 9000, but now actually I think he's the best, right? Like you're playing the Tony Hawk game and you're like, all these songs speak to me, Mom, precisely because that you told me to turn them down. Independent of that, though, like there is this idea that life in general, but modern life in particular, and digital life, right, involves these sort of orientations of vulnerability, but also of performance and anxiety and yearning to the other. You want the other to give you something, but the other, because the other is more than just specific little others,
Mhm.
there's always the possibility that they're going to give you something else, that they're going to be indifferent to you, that they're watching you when they don't want you to watch you to, et cetera, right? In some ways, our relationship to like otherness is a workaday, quote unquote, normal, a little less over the top version of what the star does, right? Because the star is always oriented towards the other. There's always somebody watching. There's always somebody wanting to know who they're sleeping with, or what they're doing, or what they're thinking, or what they're wearing.
Yeah. It's
Right.
real for them.
Yeah,
Like it's actually true.
yeah, and that I think is part of why stars and the circuit, these feedback loops we're talking about, like. Hell, I'll think here about an Annie DeFranco song, right? Where she's very angry about how like she can't wear a pair of shoes on any given day without some reporter doing a piece about how it's her statement to all womankind.
Mm.
If we think ourselves into like these vulnerable moments in our lives as like teenagers, right? Like those choices really do feel like they matter, right? Both because you're going to get teased if you wear the wrong thing, but also like, this is, because you are still figuring out how you are, your relationship to the other is uniquely, singularly fraught.
Right.
Another way to to think about this might be that as you relate to the other in different ways, as you experiment with yourself, with being different selves, you're also having experiences of non-self identity, or of yourself being kind of different others along the way.
Yes.
Right? Maybe there's one group of friends you don't want to be seen with, right? Hell, this is a foundational experience for Taylor Swift, right? In her narrative, right? As she tells it in that lovely Time magazine profile for People of the Year, right? Where her friends,
When she goes to them, her friends say that she's like wants to hang out with her friends, or she wants to go to the mall with her friends and they're busy, and then she goes to the mall and they're all there without her.
and she goes to the mall with her mom.
Yeah.
And her mom, that is like that right there, right? This idea of like, oh, they were talking about Taylor, or they thought they were cooler than Taylor. And now, well, she's got to chart her own court with her mother, who then goes on to become her manager, which is an interesting twist to this, right? But I think one way to sort of get at this, or a thing I kind of want to say and then see how we map it on to this, right, is this idea that you as a self, particularly as you developmentally grow, but also you as you relate to different specific sets of others, or also as you like experiment with the idea of looking outward towards the other in general, you try to be different selves, but also you wind up in relationships that it can be surprisingly discontinuous between yourself. And, some, again, to invoke philosophical or psychoanalytic traditions here, one way of talking about this is like there's a fragmented self, right? You are not self-identical. There's this old line from the poet Rimbaud in French, j'ai est un autre, which translates, I is an other. This idea of like other, also like the alter ego, these things are related.
Yeah, I was also thinking that Julia Kristeva, who talks about the sujet en procès, which if you translate it is the subject in process, but also the subject on trial, is a really nice way of glossing that sort of like the discontinuousness of the subject. Yeah,
and think about. I think it's worth sitting with this for a second just to think about like some of these things that seem like huge dilemmas, like earth shaking to you when you're a teenager, right? Oh, I'm no longer dating him. What about the friend? What about his friends? What about my friends? I can't be the same person. I can't like the same music anymore, right? Or I'm going to a new school. I get to be a new person, but then like, I don't know, like an Instagram post surfaces from your previous like incarnation, right? There can be an anxiety about this. And I'll name the one last thing here that I think is germane. When we were talking about cringe, right? Part of the cringe factor when you confess that, oh, I don't know, like I remember playing the Fake Plastic Trees song by Radiohead, specifically the version of it that was on the Tibetan Freedom Concert dual CD thing.
I remember that.
And like listening to that over and over again and like smoking Jarum clove cigarettes when I was like 15 and finally like, okay, this is what loneliness feels like. This is what bleakness feels like. This is truth, right? And I'm talking about this now and I'm blushing because that's obviously not what, like that track, which I actually spent hours downloading on a 28.8 modem.
Nice.
And they could listen to, like, that's not necessarily like the most sophisticated existential statement or like a referendum on what love is, but like somehow that hit for me. And I look back on that image of myself smoking the Jarums and the Peacoat with the CD player, listening to the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel cringe about that. And that cringe is like, I want to not have been that person.
Right. And that's what Taylor is refusing.
Yes.
Right. There's something that's interesting about it because like, this is about like, you don't have to be a psychoanalyst or even psychoanalytically oriented or even have spent any time thinking about like human development to just be like different people see themselves differently at different stages of their lives. And yet like there is a way in which like the Eras Tour is like the eternal return.
Yeah.
It's like the idea that like you should affirm yourself at every moment of the past and be like, I would not do it any differently. And interestingly, and so I think there's this way in which like for Taylor, she's doing that and that's what's happening and people are responding to it. And I want to get actually back to the food part in relation to this too. I smoked those Jarum clove cigarettes too. And you know what? All I think about is I'm like, those were delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't have any cringe thinking about that. I was just like, those were delicious. And you know what? I wish I could smoke those now. But, I had to give up smoking.
You can't smoke them anymore. They've been changed into cigars. They've been repackaged both legally and in terms of their contents. They're terrible.
But,
no.
I know. They have like terrible stuff. But do you know what I mean? It's like, I used to listen to that Radiohead album. I love that Radiohead album. I actually think that it's just sort of like there is this thing that just kind of happens to you if you get old enough is you're just like, yeah, all of those like no regrets and like those things had to happen.
I think what you're articulating though isn't necessarily something that arrives to everybody. I think people can feel a lot of shame about different selves. And if anything, what you're describing is a feeling of integration of previous selves.
It is.
Which is not universal. Yeah. In the Miss Americana movie, one thing that we get right from the beginning, in addition to the background of her biography, on that Christmas tree farm here in Pennsylvania, is
our hometown girl.
Mm-hmm. The image opens with her as an adult in front of a stack of her diaries.
Yeah.
And in front of lyrics that she wrote as a child. And some of them are obviously blacked out, right? But we see the home videos of her singing. Mm-hmm. And we get the sense very early on that in a way that is not just like precocious, but like driven even.
Oh yeah, deeply, deeply driven.
That this is a person who from well before her teens was turning personal experience into song. Mm-hmm. And was sort of metabolizing it in this way. So both like doing something to herself as a subject and then giving it out to the world, to other people as a performance. And this is, of course, very relevant for us as consumers of it, right? Like, it's like as we trying to figure out ourselves, well, we had this person giving us these things, right? But as a type of production of selfhood through artistic creation,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and a metabolizing experience, it made me think actually of an example, a passage from another writer, not a psychoanalytic writer, but actually of a writer who was very influential for me when I was, a teenager, Richard Rodriguez, an essayist,
Uh-huh.
who writes, among other things, about his own coming to writing about his family, right, as a child of Mexican immigrants, et cetera. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read this in some ways, because I think Taylor gives us an example of someone who doesn't have these same hangups, but who also performs the functions that Rodriguez wishes he has, and that this has to bear on the function that she serves for us collectively, right? So first, he says that in the 6th grade, a teacher told him, you should write down your personal experiences and reflections. But I shied away from the idea. I would not have wanted to write about the minor details of my life. I would never have been able to write about what was most deeply, daily concerned me during those years. However, there are remarkable children who very early are able to write publicly about their personal lives. Some children confide to a diary those things, like the first shuddering of sexual desire, too private to tell a parent or brother. The youthful writer addresses a stranger, the other, capitalize, with, quote, dear diary, and tries to give public expression to what is intensely, privately felt. In so doing, he attempts to evade the guilt of repression and the embarrassment of solitary feeling. For by rendering feelings in words that a stranger can understand, words that belong to the public, this other, the young diarist no longer need feel all alone or eccentric. His feelings become capable of public intelligibility. In turn, the act of revelation helps the writer better understand his own feelings. Such is the benefit of language. By finding public words to describe one's feelings, one can describe oneself to oneself. One names what was previously only darkly felt. And I found myself thinking about that type of production through writing, but in Taylor's case,
Of self
through music. And she literally has a bunch of these diaries in front of her, some of which remain locked.
Mm-hmm.
But we get the sense that this is a person who
On screen, but
screen, yeah.
locked.
On screen,
Okay,
but
this
yeah.
is again the dance of revelation and withholding is the Taylor Swift secret sauce.
Yeah, she simultaneously telegraphs a lot that we can identify with as people who are trying to understand ourselves, but then also withdraws just enough that we can then read into this kind of erotics or this kind of like tentative vulnerability or even a tentative beauty of the production of stories about her that we read ourselves into and vice versa. It's a wonderful type of loop.
Have I quoted? I think I probably already have on this podcast, but I will anyway. From Hélène Cixous, who has that book Dream I Tell You, where she records 50 of her dreams, and then in the preface is like, only I have the keys to unlock this. I could write that for you. And then she says, I do not do that. So it's like, it's not that there's a locked journal. It's that there's a locked journal that's being filmed.
Yeah.
So I think that this dynamic, and again, not only are we not clinicians, but we are also in the business right now only of putting the phenomenon of Taylor Swift on the couch, not Taylor Swift herself. I want to talk a little bit about the way she narrates her relationship to food, but it is not because I'm diagnosing Taylor Swift in any way. I just want to be really, really clear. I'm only talking about the language that she uses. And as I'm talking about revelation, right? Because if you think about the Eras tour, the promise that it makes is sort of like, it is the integration of a self that has been constituted through this continual process of, as Patrick said, metabolizing the self through producing music, and also like clearly metabolizing experience through writing and putting it out there for others to inhabit, right? But at the same time, there is this extreme withholding that's happening, and that is related to the withholding of of food. And I wanted also in this connection, before I even get into that, to say that there's something important here, I think, about like the Travis Kelce thing. And that is also important about eras is like Taylor is like, I'm fed now. I can eat now. I have this big beefsteak of a man now. I asked a friend of mine who's an English professor and friend of the pod, Lauren Pfeiffer. I was like, explain to me the Travis Kelce thing, because I hate it so much. And I hate that I also care about it because, like, you know, it's not like I spend a lot of time thinking about celebrity relationships. And I was like, what is it about this guy, Travis Kelce? And she said to me that the appeal has more to do with Taylor's response to Travis than it does to Travis qua Travis. I'm sort of like paraphrasing her right now. But now I'm actually quoting her. She said, seeing her out and about a lot and visibly happy is compelling, particularly after so many years when she kept her private life very private. So again, there is that, and her self-narrative involves this idea that she was private, right? That this thing happened with Kanye, especially like the kind of the second time it happened with Kanye. You know, she's like, I was alone for a year. And it's like, well, I mean, sure, I guess she was, but like, putting out stories about how you're private isn't actually especially private.
Right.
Yeah.
But so I'm going into all of this because it has so much to do with this sort of thing that has something to do with fame. Of course, there is this sense of what do you owe the other, right? The other has given you this life, which you might feel locked into or whatever. Yeah. But on the other hand, you've done it through selling the self that is being revealed. But so Taylor doesn't talk about anorexia proper in Miss Americana, but she talks about not eating.
I've learned over the years it's not good for me to see pictures of myself every day because I have a tendency, and it's only happened a few times and I'm not in any way proud of it, but I tend to get triggered by something, whether it's a picture of me where I feel like I looked like my tummy was too big, or like someone said that I looked pregnant or something, and that'll just trigger me to just starve a little bit, just stop eating. I thought that I was just like supposed to feel like I was going to pass out at the end of a show or in the middle of it. I thought that was how it was, and now I realize, no, if you eat food, have energy, get stronger, you can do all these shows and not feel it, which is really good revelation because I'm a lot happier with who I am, and I'm happier with, like, I don't care as much if, like, somebody points out that I have gained weight. It's just something that makes my life better. The fact that I'm a size 6 instead of a size 00. I mean, that wasn't how my body was supposed to be. I just didn't really understand that at the time. I really don't think I knew it.
She does it also in a retrospective mode. And she kind of returns this sort of like, I was distressed and I stopped eating, right? I withheld food from myself. And the way that she talks about how she now handles the world, you know, again, the big other relating to her in this way. And this was like interesting, as somebody who tends to be in the business of close reading, is if you'll allow me like a tiny excursion into rhetorical devices. She actually uses an anacaluthon, which is when there's like a sort of derangement of the grammar in a sentence. So like, she stops talking in I, and then she's talking about like, okay, I used to look at these sorts of photos and they would, you know, I would see like my belly's not flat enough or, you know, whatever. And she's like, now I say, we do not do this anymore.
Yeah.
We do not do this anymore. And she talks about changing the channel in her brain, but she goes from this I to this we. Yeah. And it's this moment where she's clearly reconsolidating the self in a way that's important and good. But she is also like it is like the other is in that, in this sort of way where like she become plural is like, we do not do that
Yeah.
anymore. And again, there's nothing diagnostic happening here. I'm talking about sort of the idea of anorexia as being one of withholding food from the self. And also about, in a lot of interpretations, the refusal of sexuality, right? The refusal of growing up to be a woman with the secondary sexual characteristics that tend to accompany that. I'm not trying to be biologically essentialist about this in any way. But so this is interesting to me again, in that like the Eras tour is this sort of Taylor being like, I am an adult, right? I was all of these sorts of things. But there's a part of me that's sort of, because I think so much of why she appeals to girls, to women, is because she has created this sort of like utopian fantasia where like, yeah, you grow up, but you still get to be that little girl. Is like, even her sexy dancing isn't sexy.
Yeah.
And that's
It's
not
playful.
a criticism. And
Right.
again, it's not a criticism at all. But there is a refusal of sexuality where I'm kind of like, oh, you want to have your anorexia and eat your cake too.
Yeah.
Like, and that sounds sort of dark, but like, I guess it is dark. And I don't think it has to be. In fact, I think there's something super, super lovely, especially in like the cottagecore parts of Eras, like the folklore Evermore parts, or when in some of the parts of like the earlier albums where you see her skip and where you see all the dancers skip and they're doing all of this stuff. But I think there is part of the fantasy, and this is where some of these cathexis get really dark and fucked up. It's not the sort of like sexualization of little girls. It's like the opposite of that. It's like the desexualization of women as the only way to grow up and to be a consolidated self for her. And so I have to feel like this idea of like, this isn't for, like in that Taffy Broadus or Ackner piece where she's Taffy that is saying to like the men in the audience, like, this isn't for you. She isn't for you. She didn't make herself for you. She made herself for me. It's like, this is a space where we don't care if you exist, men.
Yeah.
But part of that does rest on this sort of like I don't believe her in the parts that are like, I have reinvented myself to be this sort of like sexual woman.
I think if I might, just to gloss one or two things or to unpack some things, hopefully because I think you're onto something very, very profound about her appeal, but also about like some certain structures.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in the broader terms that are both Taylor specific, but also allow us to think about pop stars, what pop stars mean to us, but also how we become selves,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is this idea of like, where do you get to have pleasure? How do you derive pleasure? Can you have pleasure in being a self? Can you have private pleasures in addition to private heartbreaks? And how do those relate with the public performance of self and your relationship to the other?
Mm-hmm.
Right? This idea of like psychic nourishment, I think, is kind of relevant here.
Yeah. And when I say, I'm not actually talking about anorexia as a disease here. I'm talking about it as a sort of like psychic formation.
It's a structure, I think.
Yeah,
it's a structure in relation to consumption and being consumed, right?
Yes,
and I think
that's what I'm saying.
Thank
you.
Of course. I think like, and just sort of very straightforwardly to say this, right? Like, well, two things. First, just the diegetic stuff in the film,
Mhm.
right? And this is, we get in Miss Americana, we get the story of her going from would-be child star to actual child star in country, to expanding into other genres. And those are the eras, right? Each genre or each album constitutes an era, and then the albums themselves straddle certain genres, or sometimes are more associated with others. But in any event, it's the story of her becoming progressively more and more famous, but also reaching new audiences.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all set against the backdrop of what she initially describes. So she doesn't use the language of hunger for this, but as like a need a demand, almost like a yearning,
a drive,
yeah, for approval.
Yeah.
Right. I need to be thought of as good. I have to be a good girl. I was so fulfilled by approval.
Mhm.
Right. There's this idea like that. And here I'm thinking, again, not even of eating and metabolism, but psychic metabolism in the way that sunflower turns toward the sun. The sunflower turns towards the sun because it needs the sun's light,
Mhm.
right, to survive. And there's this sense here that like she turns to the gaze of the other, and that gives her something that consolidates her as a self. So we have all these images, early videos, and progressively higher and higher production values as she gets more and more popular, right, of her being in the public sphere. And of course, she's not just singing, she's a young woman singing. In other words, she is first and foremost against the backdrop of the male gaze, which I don't think she exists for, but which is nonetheless the frame of economic production that she's working against, right? Yeah. Or has to work through or with and traverse. You have her as a body in the public space singing about personal things, and then people applaud her.
Mhm.
What becomes clear as she narrates this, and when she arrives finally at that, one of several betrayals, because this is, there are real dramatic things that happen in her life, or one of several moments where just when she thinks she has this public approval, it's withdrawn from her.
Right.
And sometimes it is. Sometimes people do turn on her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is also her experience of a profound insecurity or an instability as an object of public cathexis.
Mm-hmm.
She has this line, I think it's when she's talking about Kanye in 2009, and she has the experience of like, you can actually, it's funny, like the interview she gives afterwards where she almost seems like literally, I mean, she's 17, but she almost seems almost girlish.
I don't think she is she?
Yeah, she's 17, it's 2009.
Yeah. And she seemed on the verge of tears too.
Yeah. Where she says like, someone's like, do you like his music a little bit less? And she says, well, I don't really know him, but it's Kanye. And you're suddenly like, oh, this is someone whose songs were meaningful to you. Yep. And who you now encountered as a person and who just steamrolled you because he was in a manic phase or is just an asshole or some combination thereof. The thing that really, really stuck my mind was that, well, she says, when you're living for the approval of other people, one wrong thing can ruin it. Right. And this is lots of negative selection bias. People say but I think a lot of us have this. A lot of us neurotics have this, right? You forget the nice things, but the one bad thing sticks in you for years.
Yep.
He sort of takes her by surprise, and she's literally speechless. Like her body posture changes, her whole like presentation changes. She's frozen in a different way. And earlier too, by the way, she said like what bothers her is like looking at photos where she's frozen, and suddenly she sees some aspect of herself that will send her into a loop. Right? Like she's caught in a photo where her stomach looks a particular way or her legs look a particular way. And she's like realizing that her image is not capable of control, right? Her, in the eyes of the other, there's always some angle where she's not going to look the way she ideally wants to be, or she puts it a better version of herself that's out there or that could be out there. But when she's on the stage at the VMA and Kanye does that horrible thing to her, people start booing Kanye. She says she didn't know if they were she thought that they were booing her. So she has this double betrayal, or what she experiences as a double betrayal, one of this figure who was, larger than life to her, now coming in just to shit on her. And she's like, but I still like Kanye. I mean, even Donald Trump, when he gets a narcissistic injury from Taylor Swift is like, I guess I like her music a little bit less.
25% less.
Yeah. Which is wild. But like, again, like these people still loom outside, right? The energy cathexis is still there. She's still cathected into Kanye, though now her relationship is a little bit different. You also get the sense that in this moment where like the red carpet was kind of pulled out from under her by him, she felt the entire structure of her relationship to the other collapsing or flipping. And that produced a real crisis in her own self-awareness. She calls it a formative experience that sends her down some bad, quote, psychological paths.
I have in my notes that it was like a moment where she realized she can't fully control this. There was like that bell is now rung. This is out of your control.
And it seems to make some sense in this context, particularly also she deals with all these double binds, right? She lists them, right? Like, be young for us, be new for us, but not too young, but not too, be edgy, but don't make us uncomfortable, right? And I'm thinking here of that speech in the Barbie thing too, which we I think we rightly found kind of anodyne and if not cynical, right? Here she like actually presents those contradictions, and they're grounded in not just her public performance, but in her body, right? At some point, she's like, you can't achieve these body standards, because even if you were to achieve some, you automatically lose others. As she says, right? You can be thin,
But then you can't have an ass.
And specifically, you can't have the ass that everyone wants,
Mm-hmm.
right? So literally, if she wants universal approval from people, she's encountering the fact that she can't get it. And the space, because even when she's like on some structural level, it can never be unanimous. It can never be totally affirming. The other is always too big to contain the set of people who, it never just is reducible to the people in the stadium who are applauding her. And where this goes, and where I want to like, where I'm thinking again about your question about like private pleasure, public pleasure, when can she feel safe like she's arrived? When does she get to have pleasure herself, or like a pleasure that she doesn't have to share,
Yeah.
or pleasure that could turn into heartbreak that she can have on her own? It follows that, again, not diagnosing her with anorexia, but that control over her own body would be a place where those anxieties would be manifested, and where she would try to like manage her self-presentation, and where she would have these strange experiences of like, well, she describes it. I'm at the peak of my game. I'm running this performance, but I feel like I'm going to fall over, right? Even as she's being approved, there's this like, there's this disjunction between her beauty and grace on stage and all the approval that she's supposedly being nourished with, but also she's starving herself and she feels like shit.
There's something, I mean, we were watching this and I was talking about like the narcissistic pleasure. And I don't mean that like in a negative way. I just mean like in the sort of like when you're doing something really well in public, it feeds you.
Yeah.
And I realize this is like a hilarious thing to say into a microphone, but like I'm a pretty private person. So like I don't really get the narcissistic pleasure of self-revelation. That doesn't appeal to me personally. But the thing that I do want to think about when you're talking about the big other and the ways in which it can kind of turn on you, and the ways in which just thinking about subject formation in, you know, us regular human beings, in some ways, you can understand that in these heightened ways. It's more visible in celebrity, just because, you know, it's not like we are privy to Taylor Swift's interjects, but we actually do see her interactions with the public over and over. I kept thinking about what it must be like to be on that stage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for her in this way where she's like, I am at the top of my game. And just how profoundly destabilizing a life that must be. You know, we watched 5 hours of Taylor Swift yesterday. And I think there is this way in which a few hours into it, I was starting to like think of myself as the person on that stage, right? This is that question of identification, which could be separate from or could be related to this idea of cathexis. But I thought, what a profound narcissistic pleasure it must be to play your own music that you have like taken back from, you know, these sort of malignant, I mean, in her view, these sort of malignant male figures.
Yep.
You know, whether it's Kanye or Scooter Braun. And, you know, I'm not commenting on the sort of like reality basis of any of that, you know, and to play your own songs. Because it seemed in some way to me, there's this tension between being so aimed at something, so ambitious, so from an early age, that requires an enormous sense of self, right? It does. And like, yet the self is shored up by and made possible by all of these anonymous folks waving cell phones. And it just struck me, what a profound sense of pleasure. I mean, I understand the sense of pleasure for like teaching a great class, but like the most, there's like 27 people in that class. Do you know what I mean? You know, and it's a high, right? I'm sure that has absolutely nothing on playing a sold out stadium.
100,000 people. Yeah.
You know, but also like those lights go off and those people go away. And weirdly, you know, I can't think in some way of anybody more dispersed than Taylor Swift, who's going about like in some ways her most real existence is like in like the brainworms of all of the people in America who have little bits of her life and self that
wedged into themselves.
Exactly.
The soundtrack to their heartbreaks, to their falling in love, to their betrayals. Yeah.
What a thing. You know, what a thing that must be.
There were I think there were 2 edits in the documentary that I loved, and both of them showed the crescendo of the music building. The lights are starting to swell. She's walking up the stage. The pillars starting to go up in the air. The music's about to start, and then it hard cuts to her in sweats on her couch sipping a latte or something like that.
Yeah.
And both of those things gave me chills. My thing, for one thing, watching the documentary before watching the Eras Tour video changed the way I saw the Eras Tour video. And now I kind of wonder if I went back in time and reversed those orders, how the documentary would hit me versus how the Eras Tour would have hit me. I feel like I did it in the right way.
Yeah.
That's why I told you to do it.
Yeah. It was good advice. It was good advice. I'm jiving with everything you guys are putting out there, but I can't help but shake this idea that, one, the documentary felt made by Taylor.
Yeah.
Right. It very much, I don't think there's a beat in there that she didn't have explicit say yes or no over.
Yes.
So we're talking about her through the lens of struggle that she has sculpted herself, like her challenges with her weight and eating.
Yeah. Her hero's journey.
Were this 10 years earlier and were her name Miley Cyrus, would her struggle be to be seen as a fully sexual woman and no longer as a child star? Right? The arc, the conflict that she painted for herself in this documentary, just like her music, is also very timely.
Yeah.
It also hits on very universal strings, like things that a lot of people are struggling with. And it's also coasting right at the front edge of what people are realizing is okay to say out loud and talk about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was really struck. That's, I think, really, really astute. And I'm thinking about what both of you guys are saying. And like, part of me feels like there is something about her. I feel like she weaves this, or rather she plays in, or hell, and we'd also say it too, she capitalizes. She's $1 billion.
Yes.
And she's a billionaire. And I got to say, I don't think billionaires should exist, and I think that their existence is a moral scandal. However, I'm willing to say that more than any other billionaire I can think of, she actually fucking works.
She earned it. She earned it.
She redistributes a lot of it.
Yes.
Also,
yeah,
is
but
important. We still don't want her to be a billionaire.
No,
That's the official position of this podcast.
Yeah,
No billionaires.
Yeah, but like, I think that this gets it in the sense that like, her production of self is also a means of selfhood production for other people. And we're all into this sort of political libidinal economic model.
Yep.
And we're all vibing with it. And I think that there's something that she manages to navigate this in a way that still seems grounded. And I'm with you, Dan, that a lot of it seems quote unquote calculated, which is a term she herself uses. But that's one of those amazing double binds that she has,
Yes,
right? Where
yes.
it's like, she even has this line verbatim where she basically says, I spend every day trying to not do things that will get me shamed, but then I'll be like pilloried for saying I'm calculated and thinking too much ahead of time. Right. So there's literally no way she can win. And yet she still is winning. And she keeps winning. It's remarkable how, even as, I was thinking of other examples, whether it be Beyonce or Eminem or any other people who have had lots of alter egos and lots of quote unquote different eras, and and their performance of self involves many selves, some of whom chafe against the public, others of whom don't, who trail and lead public consciousness vis-a-vis issues from sexual assault to artists' rights, et cetera, like over their own copyrighted material, et cetera. Like she somehow like navigates through these things in a way that has proven durable and that hasn't had these kind of like breakdowns or missteps, or at least even when there are missteps or breakdowns, they're integrated into the narrative. Whereas, for example, like someone like Kanye, right? It makes some sense to me that Kanye is, well, I'm trying to imagine like, what's the type of psyche that could possibly function doing 100 stadium events in a year or whatever. It's 173 for Eras, right? I mean, personally, I can only imagine this as a peak experience if I'm like David Lee Roth or something. I'm Eddie Van Halen and I am coked to the fucking gills and also incredibly drunk, and that's how you manage it, right? Literally, you got to be out of your head and out of your body and ruining both those things. But then, like, if you probably feel like God for a while,
Yeah,
right?
and Taylor's totally sober, and she has prepped for this tour by running on the treadmill for the length of the entire set list, singing it every day.
At which point...
and no alcohol. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, that's how you hold it together. And then the alternative is Kanye fucking West, right? Who, there are other things going on there too. But, like, I think that you could see how a position of that type of superstardom, where yourself is under scrutiny constantly, can produce anything ranging from like a really consolidated ego, like with the aspects of control and withholding that we might associate with like an anorexic type, right? To a straight up like psychotic series of paranoid breaks or messianic delusions, which is the Kanye space.
Mhm.
And yet she seems to, for reasons that I think are singular to her, that I don't, would have, who knows, right? These, I think, how she sustains herself in some ways is an open question. And
Well, she does have 3 cats.
and she talks about her
those
work,
seem to provide her with a lot of joy.
and she talks about the work ethic too. And I have to admit, I find that the idea of like having a process that you return to hold you even as you fall apart. And
It's admirable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably
it
the
is.
only way to do it, right?
Yeah.
But also the cats.
The cats. Yeah, the cats. It's
I mean,
interesting.
have you seen those backpacks that they travel in?
And their cat's very adorable. Yeah.
It's interesting how one vector that she seems to arrive at for integrating these sort of different performances of self. Well, the ultimate one is the Eras Tour, right? Which I think is really cool. But also a lot of it involves like turning to actually having a political orientation of some sort, whether successful or not. But she seems to, like, for example, really dislike Marsha Blackburn.
Good for her.
Yeah, rightly fucking so.
Right.
But also the character of that antipathy seems to have a lot to do with the fact that Marsha Blackburn is performing explicitly, constantly down home Tennessee Christian values. And that's also durable and successful. And who knows what's going on in the interiority there. But clearly that type of limitless public performance in the service of evil is noxious to her and moves her in a certain direction, right? And she gets more people to register to vote in like a day than people have in a month, right, or a year even. It's an absurd statistic like that. But I guess like it also had me thinking, and I wanted to call attention to this one moment to ask you guys what you thought about it, where she describes her own experience both because of the Scooter Braun thing and also the sexual assault by the DJ who grabs her during a photo shoot and then denies it, as radicalizing, but also as her arriving at a type of like, I don't want to say like Fanonian disalienation, but she literally describes it as like, I have to learn how to identify the misogyny that was put in my own brain without my being aware of it, right? The way the other has shaped my vision of self. And then I have to, she quote, deprogram it and then put it outside and dismantle it with other people. And I was like, that sounds a lot to me like a type of collective therapy.
Yeah. I love that part. And partway through explaining to the interviewer this process that she's going for, doesn't she stammer? And then she says, sorry. And then she catches herself and goes, why did I just say sorry? Yeah.
Why did I say sorry in this house I bought for myself?
Right. With my money that I earned. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great moment.
I actually hated that moment.
Oh, really?
But
I mean,
I don't want to have like another, like Taylor Swift's like kind of faux feminism is like another. I mean, I'm not saying that we need to be like Taylor Swift, like lead us towards intersectional feminist paradise. But I also don't want to, protest too much in terms of Taylor Swift political radical, because that's really not that's not it.
It's certainly not what Bob Hope would have done.
I mean, no, but like when you think about like the man or whatever, it's fine.
I guess like, so part of me, just to return to these themes of like nourishment and control and public selves versus private selves, like I have no investment in Travis Kelce. He seems like a himbo. I don't like whatever.
He doesn't seem like he contains multitudes though. And
I don't know him.
If Eras has shown us anything, it's that Taylor definitely does.
That's true.
That's my objection. All right.
Yeah.
That's my public statement on Travis Kelce. I do not believe he contains multitudes.
All right. Pache, the uncertainties. Well, how do we say this? The interior life of any other person is always black box.
Sure.
Though sometimes those boxes seem smaller or larger than others. All I will simply say is, in a culture where it's like, oh, Leonardo DiCaprio gets his 30th, like
20-year-old
20 something,
girlfriend,
right?
Yeah.
And like at his 60th birthday, or where the fuck that guy's aging up on. The fact that she chooses to, like, this hunkish guy whose come-ons to her like were like incredibly sort of cringe in their own right, who probably like, doesn't know how to spell squirrel. Hell, I don't really know how to spell either. But like,
You know how to spell squirrel.
I mean, it's true.
Tell me now if you don't.
I would spell it less like Squirtle, I guess. But like, some part of me like can't begrudge that to her. I don't know. Like,
I'm not begrudging it. I just feel like, she's a wordsmith. Come on.
well, maybe a wordsmith wants a partner who's just going to shut the fuck up sometimes. And like, I'm not saying that like,
Don't give me ideas.
No. I want to be clear here. Like, imagine though, like, if this were, oh, honey, I mean, like, but if this were, but if this were any man, right? Like any like rock star, like I don't know, like dating like some supermodel or something. And people are like, I don't know if she can compose lyrics on par with you. And you're like, yes, well, that's the entire character of this role is just like, of course, this person.
But she's been writing songs for almost 20 years about like romance and about all of it. I mean, it's just like, that bit from Arrested Development where Jason Bateman is always like her about Michael Cera's girlfriend Anne. That's how I feel about Travis Kelce. I'm like, him?
I mean, if you think back, one of her first big breakout hit songs was all about pining for the football star while she's in the bleachers wearing sneakers watching.
Yeah.
And here we are at the end of her arc. And she got the football star.
I liked her British twink era. I'm sorry. I just I liked it. I liked it better. And I just
I wish
don't
them
know.
the best. They seem happy. Mazel tov. Enjoy each other. They seem kind.
I guess.
She seems kind.
But it's like, like we don't quote Zizek a lot on this podcast, but like, like enjoy your symptom, like get a better symptom.
I mean, but we don't look. There are a lot of things about him that we have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, all I'm just saying is like,
I mean, I like the man can put together a fit. I respect that.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I like about him.
He's handsome.
And
He's
like,
well dressed.
come on.
I think
like,
well here.
and I know you're just sitting here being like, you're jealous because his podcast is more successful than, than ours. No, I'm just kidding.
On that note,
Well, no, wait, hold on. I think like let's thematize this more psychoanalytically here, maybe, and just be like, what's at stake for us
Yes.
in the idea that this person who has traversed the fantasy and is continually remaking themselves
That's what it is.
in connection with like their past selves and authorizing other people to be like, it's okay to have liked this album at this point and then to like
Right.
this other album.
But
Like,
then you come out on the other end of it and it's not that guy.
yeah, but like this is, I feel like this is kind of like therapy where it's like, imagine like a therapist being like, well, I'm thinking of that Adam Phillips essay on narcissism.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll talk a lot about narcissism, right? Let's just now say that like, yes, there are pathological ways of thinking about narcissism, but another way of thinking about narcissism as a type of self-fixation is perfectly normal and healthy. The cathexis of things in the object world with unique personal significance, right? What we were talking about when we opened, right?
Mhm.
The songs that like became the soundtrack for First Love and that will forever now make you feel a little bit weird whenever you hear it as you like, I don't know, like draw blood and give urine at the doctor's office because you now have to have regular checkups because you're 40 or whatever, right? Like,
Ew.
yeah,
didn't like it.
it's like
I wanna get rid of
while
it.
you're waiting for the colonoscopy. It's drops in
No!
Jupiter, and you're like, oh my god, no.
Too personal.
No, that was older than me. Or actually, I'm too old for that one. But like, actually, if it were like Collective Soul playing when I go in for my business, oh my god, that would be really. Oh, Goo Goo Dolls' Iris.
You're killing
as
me.
they're like making.
Give a new example.
All right,
I
Abby's
gotta get out
turning
of
to
this
dust.
chair.
Okay,
I'm
here.
dying.
Here's
I'm
what-
gonna find a himbo. I'm gonna be in my himbo era if you don't change the subject.
You know what? I won't begrudge it if you.
You
traverse
would.
it. I
You
probably
would begrudge
I'd be
it.
heartbroken, but I'd have a large discography of Taylor Swift songs to work through it. Like the point, if we're
I'd
looking
pick a
for
better
point,
himbo.
of all the himbos she's dated, I like Harry Styles.
Yeah, I like Harry Styles
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Um,
Tom Hiddleston's charming too.
I don't remember anything about him. He seems kind of
I think I prefer the new guy over any of those people. All those other guys strike me as like a little too self-involved. The new guy, my impression of Kelsey is he's a dude that has a preferred Fortnite skin. He's played the first 7 hours of Elden Ring and dropped it, and he can get a pint with the boys.
Yeah.
And I don't want that for Taylor Swift.
Oh man, yeah, whatever. Have fun.
I guess the question then becomes, particularly against the backdrop of all these things we talk about, nourishing, need, whatever. If she decides that that's what she actually wants,
Well, then that's
Right.
disappointing.
well, it's disappointing to you, right? And this, I'm thinking here
But
about.
apparently,
I
you
see what
guys
you're
are fine
saying.
with it.
Well, I mean, I promise this is not just as simple as like, well, every guy wishes that he could be the football star who ends up with the mega pop star, because that's that's not my jam. But like, I do think it's interesting, and this is a thing I think that clinicians talk about all the time, right? Where we'll get Lacanian again. You take someone to
Thank God.
to the limit of the of all these predetermined identities that they've been saddled with. You have to be this, you have to be that. And then, as Lacan puts it, a good therapy takes you to the ecstatic limit of the thou art that, right?
Yeah.
And then allows you to make your own destiny. You traverse the fantasy. You can't take you beyond that,
Yeah.
right? So if like she decides that she authentically wants that, or as authentically as anyone can want anything, then the issue becomes our reconciling that object choice on her part with the mental image that we have developed of this incredibly sophisticated, desiring subject who she is in all her songs and as the person who's produced these songs.
And who can turn a phrase. And I just want her to be with somebody who can appreciate that she can turn a phrase.
Growing up on a Christmas tree farm looms larger in her life than the bullet point that it is in my notes about her. I see it like, I don't know. I think it's sweet. I think it's nice. I'm a romantic. I want them to be happy. I see what you're saying, Patrick. You're saying that
And he's not even hot.
the resistance. Well, we can disagree on that.
I don't know. I had some. No, I mean, like, I'll own that too. We're getting a little cringe here. I think he's got some stuff going on.
He's good looking. He's a good looking guy.
Can you imagine just like nestling your head into his trapezius and how safe you'd feel?
Dude, no, I think he's
Sorry.
the little spoon. I think that's part of the charm. My impression is that he seems to be the little spoon.
I will say that I did listen to an interview with him, which was delightful, where he's like, she is so smart. She's always blowing my mind, dude. And you know what? Honestly,
that's kind of nice.
If he's just showering her with beatific wonder.
I mean, I
that's
guess that is what she wants.
Yeah.
Have we got you there?
Okay. So who's in the celebrity draft pick? And celebrity here can include, I don't know, you could bring back, it could be not just athletes. You can have literary figures, intellectuals. Hell, they could even be dead. You could have Seamus Heaney coming back from the dead, a young Seamus Heaney.
Okay, this is about you and not about me.
No, but like really,
we're learning about Patrick's polymorphous perversity with respect to dead Irish poets.
It's I mean, the Beowulf translation is really good, but also his Russian translations. But leave that in mind. Like,
see, you wouldn't want a Travis Kelce either.
But I'm not Taylor Swift.
I know. Neither am I.
Who would you ideally like to see Taylor Swift in a love match forever?
Not her mirror, but her complement. I can think of a few like partners that would be mirrors. I've always thought Taylor Swift had a David Bowie arc.
I mean, I would never steal David Bowie away from Iman, obviously. But I like where you're going with that.
But that would be the mirror. But what would you pick?
I'm thinking this isn't my like pick. I actually don't like this necessarily, but I think it would make more sense is for her to be with like a Timothée Chalamet or something like that. And just to be clear, I've been complaining about Timothée Chalamet for years because I feel that he lacks gravitas, but at least he like fakes having gravitas. Like the part that offends me, here's what offends me so much about Travis Kelce is that I think in some way, Taylor Swift is a serious woman. In some way, she is. And that's why it offends me for like, after all of this stuff, for her to just be like, I don't know, him? What?
No, just in listening to you think about it, I feel like we're listening, or all of us think about this. I feel like we are listening to all of the mechanisms we've been describing.
Yes,
so
exactly.
far in this like all of them at work.
I know,
Yeah.
and that's why you're making me do this.
It's why I set aside this beautiful page of Christopher Bollas I was going to read, because actually we're just doing it. So yeah.
No, I do want to hear that.
Okay, fine.
Before we end, I'm blanking. Timothy
Timothée Chalamet's an answer.
Yeah.
I don't even like Timothy.
Well, he's sort of
Chalamet.
dark haired and she's blonde. Yeah, it would work. I mean, Can I ask you a question relatedly?
Sure.
Or just to put something to you, what if she's playing a really long game? What if she is a mastermind?
As the song goes.
As the song goes. I can't think of a better first husband for America's first woman president than Travis Kelce talking about how brilliant his wife is
All right. Well,
in the Rose Garden.
I mean, that
2024.
That sounds great to me.
We'd have to cancel the Eras Tour, which would probably produce
Taylor
a recession,
Swift,
but we're going to get one
primary
anyway.
Joe
so-
Biden.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, she would win.
Yeah, absolutely. She absolutely would.
Yeah.
Even Oprah has been like, this person is mind-bogglingly put together as a total social fact. So
All right.
Fine.
Taylor Swift 2024.
Nathan Robinson said the same thing in Current Affairs. I don't know where that puts us, but she would be a great president. But probably she wouldn't be. That would probably be.
Well, I don't know. I mean, she's good at surrounding herself with a team that. I mean,
Yeah.
she gets shit done,
That's true.
right? And she redistributes quite a lot of wealth.
So, would you like me to read
I want to
Christopher
read.
Bollas?
You've been promising it, and also I read it before, and it's really beautiful.
Would you like to read it? Your voice
Uh,
is so much nicer than mine.
You can hand it over to me, and you cue it up a little bit, and I will read it.
So this is from a really lovely collection of essays by the psychoanalyst Christopher Bollas, who's one of my favorite sort of psychoanalytic thinkers, but is also just a beautiful writer. And this is from his lovely book, Being a Character. And it's about essentially, well, it's about what we've been talking about in a lot of ways. It's about the way in which like our self is constituted in relation to the other, but also like the pleasures of discontinuity and selfhood, but about reintegration of those things and how that's an ongoing dynamic process as part of being a person. I came across this passage and I thought it was something that might be interesting, not just vis-a-vis Taylor Swift, but vis-a-vis the Taylor Swift phenomenon and vis-a-vis these broader dynamics of like cathectic investment in people.
Absolutely.
Go for it.
It's a beautiful passage. I am inhabited then by inner structures that can be felt whenever their name is evoked. And in turn, I am also filled with the ghosts of others who have affected me. In psychoanalysis, we term these internal objects, which clearly do not designate internal pictures or clear inner dramas, but rather highly condensed psychic textures, the trace of our encounters with the object world. This suggests, among other things, that as we encounter the object world, we are substantially metamorphosed by the structure of objects, internally transformed by objects that leave their traces within us, whether it be the effect of a musical structure, a novel, or a person. In play, the subject releases the idiom of himself to the field of objects, where he is then transformed by the structure of that experience and will bear the history of that encounter in the unconscious. To be a character is to enjoy the risk of being processed by the object. Indeed, to seek objects, in part, in order to be metamorphosed, as one goes through change by going through the processional moment provided by any object's integrity. Each entry into an experience of an object is rather like being born again, as subjectivity is newly informed by the encounter, its history altered by a radically effective present that will change its structure. To be a character is to gain a history of internal objects, inner presences that are the trace of our encounters, but not intelligible or even clearly knowable, just intense ghosts who do not populate the machine, but inhabit the human mind.
It seems to be like what he's saying is you get to have eras, right? You get to
have
integrate them.
eros.
Yeah.
I thought first you said you get to have eros.
Well, both.
Both and. All right, friends. It's been real.
Thank you, Taylor.
This has been an episode of Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin, and today I was joined by Patrick Blanchfield and Dan Yowell. This podcast is produced by Dan Yowell. Theme music by Formal Chicken.
Travis, let's hang out. Hit me up.
You know, his brother is the one that lives in Philadelphia. That plays for the Eagles. God.
And,
It's like you're not even on the internet.
I-
Taylor
no
Swift's
idea.
a huge Eagles fan.
yeah, Taylor
Yeah, that's
Swift.
her
Yeah.
team. Yeah.
Go Birds.
Go Birds.
Go Birds.